Good evening, California, from a rather dark and cold early morning in England. I'm really delighted to be here at your holiday party, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but thanks to the wonders of Skype and the hospitality of Stanford University's Engineering Center, I'm able to join you virtually. And today I'm actually going to talk about what being international means for SLA and our members. So when Philip and I first talked about doing this, we discussed possible topics, and I felt that this topic was quite pertinent since I am the incoming President-Elect for 2013 for SLA and the first non-North American to take up this role. And so being international is actually key to success for us as individuals, for the profession and SLA. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and I'm going to cover a number of points. I'm going to talk about why I think I'm qualified to talk about being more international, what I see as some of the drivers for being international, take a little look at SLA's current international makeup and see what it is, and then discuss the challenges, opportunities and benefits of becoming more international. Okay, so I'm hoping that you'll take away from this a number of hints, tips and ideas and insights which you can mull over during the festive, as we would say here in England, or holiday season, as you would say in the US, to help you to make SLA more inclusive and by default more international. Okay, so how and why do I think I'm qualified to talk about being international? It's a very big presumption, actually. Just because I speak with an English accent and I'm sitting in England doesn't give me the right at all. What I can do is talk about my experience of dealing on a big, broad global stage. To begin with, for those of you who don't already know it, I was born in the US of an American and British parents. I lived in the US for my early years, moved to England at the age of 4 and have lived here ever since. But I've made frequent trips to the US to visit family and to work for summers. From a young age, I learnt different words were used in each of these countries. For example, football game in the US, well, we say football match in the UK, that you make a line in the US and you join the queue in the UK. I got used in the 1970s to questions in the US about whether we had bathtubs and TVs in the UK. So I did realise there was a divide. To quote George Bernard Shaw, England and America are two countries separated by a common language. So I've probably got a good sense of the cultural differences between these two nations, but that isn't the whole world. I have, in my work, been involved or immersed in dealing with people from many different cultures and countries. For over 10 years, I worked in the library dealing with reference questions for the BBC World Service. That's a radio service. It's a cross between NPR and VOA. And in 1989, broadcast content in over 40 foreign languages. That's now been reduced to 28. Plus, it ran a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week English language channel. Now, over those 10 years, I worked with lots of staff who spoke English as a second language and hailed from other countries. It was truly a multicultural place to work. It taught me to develop a cultural empathy, something that is vital if you want to function well in an international setting. So that's enough about me and my credentials for speaking on this topic. I'm now going to talk about some of the drivers or shifts pushing us to be international. I think this is quite important to get some of this context to really appreciate what is going on. I'm sorry, I keep getting a message coming up. Right, okay, I might have to cut that bit out. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about are these drivers. So the first of them is around changing technology. Increased connectivity and convergence are making things much easier for us to be well connected and to collaborate. Gone are the days when you had to book a telephone call. Now you have instant access to anyone in the world. The second point I wanted to raise was about smaller world. Aided by technology, it's now possible to get to far-flung places speedily and cheaply. What was once seen as a once-in-a-lifetime trip, say going to Australia, is now seen as something you do several times in a lifetime. And in terms of international politics, just last week we had Hillary Clinton speaking at the Brookings Institute before a trip to Europe, stressing the fact that the transatlantic partnership is reaching a critical moment with decisions to be made about shaping future economic interests. In part, this is due to the next point, which is about emerging markets. And on emerging markets, I was quite struck at conference when Robin Bew from the Economist Intelligence Unit gave a compelling talk on the changing global economy. He concluded that we've all got to be international to be successful in the future, as by 2020, China will overtake the US as the bigger economy, and by 2030, emerging markets will have overtaken G7. The next of these trends or shifts is about demographic shifts. And this is where Generation Y and Millennials come in. And Generation Y and Millennials have a very different perspective on the use of technology and the expectations on how to behave. And interestingly, technology and demographic shifts, identified as the two shifts causing decline in membership of associations by Sarah Sladek in her book, The End of Membership as We Know It, are really key to what's going on at the moment. And her solution to this decline is to focus on offering members better benefits. So perhaps we should be thinking about capitalising on SLA's international reach as a member benefit. And then the final point I put on there about why do we need to be international is about my election. And I have been very pleased that I am the first non-North American to be elected, and I think it just shows that the organisation as a whole is thinking more globally. So on to my next slide. And this is a map of the world, and I wanted to actually look at what our current makeup as an association is, and to actually look at what a definition of an international organisation is. So I'm using Wikipedia, and the definition there of an international organisation is an organisation with an international membership, scope, or presence. Okay, so in terms of membership, I think we can say that we have an international membership. This map shows you all of our geographic boundaries for our various chapters. So you can see that we do have an Australia-New Zealand chapter. We obviously have our chapters in the US and in Canada. And then we have our Hawaii and Pacific chapter, and we have our Florida Caribbean chapter. We have a sub-Saharan chapter that is in provisional status at the moment. And we also, we also have our Europe chapter. So we obviously do have membership scope and presence that makes us international. So what I wanted to do was actually start to think about the numbers of members that we actually do have. And I've got my map showing you, and I wanted to do the interactive bit here, which is, you guess how many we've got. So I wanted to ask if anybody had any thoughts on the numbers of members that we have in the US.
8,000.
We heard 8,000.
8,000?
I said 7.
7? Any more?
3,000.
We actually have 7,050 in the US, and these figures are current figures for the 3rd of December. In Canada, we have 881. And would you like to take a guess at what we have in the Australia-New Zealand area? That is 67. So the first of the graphs I'm going to show you, and I've taken the figures that I've just been quoting from, and I have graphed them. And these are the countries that we have members in, and we have 9 or fewer members. So this just gives you an idea. You'll see the scale on the side gives the actual numbers. It goes up to 10, and then the countries are given on the bottom. And you may well be able to see, so for example, we have 1 member in South Korea, and in Egypt, and in Cameroon. Sorry, I'm going backwards and forwards. Whereas we have 3 members currently in the Netherlands and in Barbados. In Uganda we have 4. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about numbers. My second graph shows you countries where we have 10 or more members. And so you'll see that we have quite a low number in France and Kuwait and Trinidad and Tobago, and then we go up higher with more in India and the UK, and then we move to Canada and to America. So it just gives you an idea about our numbers. And one of the other things I wanted to do was just talk about our international credentials and give you a little bit of a line around the dates that some of our chapters were created, because I think it shows you that we are actually in, we do have our international credentials, our scope and our presence. Florida and Caribbean chapter was created in 1969, the Hawaiian and Pacific chapter in 1972, and then our next two ones down there are the Arabian Gulf chapter created in 1993, the Asian chapter in 1999, and then the Australian New Zealand chapter in 2004. And we have had one conference that was outside North America, and that was the Global 2000 conference in 2000, and that was in the UK. So I think that underlines the fact that we do actually have an international presence. We have the chapters, we have a scope that includes international issues, and we have a membership that covers those. So just want to look briefly at some of the challenges that exist in being an international association. And key here is understanding other people's perspective while suspending judgment. And we all need to develop some kind of characteristic of sensibility to culture, which I'd like to kind of call cultural empathy. And we need to bear in mind or be conscious of a number of issues around culture as challenges. The first one I want to talk about briefly is language. So I've already talked a little bit about American English and British English, but there are other issues kind of around non-English languages and non-native speakers in any language, and I think we have to just be conscious about that. We all use different ways of speaking, and we all have to be conscious about those people for whom English is not necessarily their first language. So we've just got to be conscious of that. The next thing to think about is vocabulary, and to think about what we say and how we say it, and to be aware that quite often the way we use and say words can be confusing to others who don't necessarily speak the same native language, let alone to those of us who do. So misconceptions can arise if we're not aware of speech and vocabulary we use and how it's interpreted by those we're talking to. So I think we have to be careful about assumptions about what the meaning of words are, to be clearer about what we're actually trying to say. And then there's non-verbal communication, and we have to be aware that we can very often give off mixed signals if we're not aware of the communication style of the people with whom we're working. And different cultures behave in different ways in terms of how they operate with non-verbal communication. And this is heightened when you have the issue that you may not actually ever meet the person that you're dealing with face to face. And quite often it's a lot easier to conduct virtual meetings when you've actually had the opportunity to meet people face to face. I think you just need to be aware of that. In some cultures, for example, in Asian cultures, people won't necessarily want to ask questions in large groups. So, you know, you just have to be aware of that in terms of how you run a meeting or how you present things. Then there are the issues around national cultures and contexts, and you just have to be aware of cultural and institutional nuances, the way in which certain people operate, how they operate, how their hierarchies might work, what culturally is acceptable, etc. There are lots of things you can do in terms of reading this up, talking to people about it. The next issue is time zones, and this is one I think that is probably the one that affects most people most readily, and it proves to be a big issue. And it can be quite difficult to accommodate time differences. And I was talking to one of my SLA colleagues who works in a virtual team, and she is in the UK, and the rest of the team are on the West Coast in the States. And she says it can be very difficult to accommodate that 8-hour time difference, and it relies on an awful lot of give and take, and agreeing, compromising on timing and the frequency of meetings and what's discussed, etc. So I think there are lots of things around the time difference that we need to think about, how we can mitigate those issues. And it might be varying times of meetings and the preparation around it. It's just being aware that when something's going to happen in one country, just thinking about what the time will be somewhere else. I was particularly struck, I have to say, earlier this year when I was doing webinars for the election, and some people who attended those webinars were completely oblivious to the fact it was midnight my time. I was quite happy to be up and to be presenting because it was a good time for other parts of the world, and so we could have a mix of people from Australia and New Zealand, from the Caribbean, and from the East and the West Coast in the US. But it just seemed really odd to me that people weren't aware that I was sitting here in my pajamas. So I think there are some things we need to think about just with time zones. And then I think we need to be very cognizant of the challenges of what SLA membership is for different groups. So there is something around thinking about what really matters for some people, and there will be some cultural challenges around the fact that the membership offering for people who don't live in the US or in Canada may find it very difficult to attend conference, so don't get some of that as their membership offering. But I think we just need to think about some of those challenges as we go forward. So there are always opportunities that arise from challenges, and I think we need to be aware of the fact that we can get very different perspectives on culture and different perspectives full stop on issues and cultures from the different membership that we have, that there may be a really interesting way of dealing with something that nobody's ever thought of, that might come from somebody who comes from a different culture or from a different country or a different way of thinking things through. So I think that's quite important as an opportunity. There's a wonderful opportunity to collaborate and to be aware of some ideas and thoughts that might come up that you would never have dreamed of thinking about. So I think there are some opportunities there that we may not necessarily have thought of before now. And then there are some great opportunities for partnership working. And I think that we need to be aware of that and think about how we can leverage some of that. So whether that's partnerships between individuals in countries or between other associations, that would be great. And then there's the whole idea around innovation. Quite often innovation comes from being able to explore different ways of doing things. So I think all of the challenges we've talked about can also offer us definite opportunities. So then what are the benefits to SLA and members of becoming more international? Well, the first one I've outlined there for SLA is that actually it is a unique selling point. And we need to be clear that actually what SLA can offer is an international network, and that there are learning opportunities that no one else can offer. And I think it is actually something that is really important and really valuable. And it's something that we often overlook. And as the trends that I talked about at the beginning that are influencing things, whether it's technology or whether it's generational differences, those things are just going to make everybody want to get more connected as we go forward. So the fact that we already have an international membership and networks and learning opportunities, I think is something that we need to really be pushing. What SLA can help you with is bringing you access to global resources. It was one of the original reasons I joined SLA in the late 90s, was that as a news librarian, I suddenly became able to access materials, thoughts and ideas from across the world that would enable me to be able to better serve the people I was working for in the BBC. So our unique selling point is that you get that international network and it does give you access. There are also benefits for SLA in terms of collaboration, and that means that we can collaborate with other associations, with other groups, etc. And we can give members more than they would have been getting from just one organisation. And we can also work around the partnership. So we can partner with others to deliver some things, and there are some things in the pipeline that no doubt will be happening in the future that will help us show that our partnership is important. For our members, well, of course, they're going to get an international network, which is worth its weight in gold, and which can help them in leveraging things at work, and no doubt, showing the ability to share best practice to make sure that they're keeping ahead of things, etc. There's the learning and sharing opportunities, and I think all we can do is say that you will be able to share and to learn with others in a very safe and informal environment. The fun element, and I think we all know this, is the fact that you develop lifelong friends, and you have the ability to do some practical things like house swap, or if you're going somewhere on vacation, or you're just going on a business trip, you've got a whole network of people, and you may not necessarily know people in the city or the town you're going to, but you can find them in the directory, you can email them, you can say, oh, I'm coming, could you help me? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a wonderful experience. You're going to have that local knowledge, etc. And the other thing about the fun is that actually there is a group on Twitter of librarians live tweeting a movie who are on their 3rd movie at the moment, and they did that last week, and they sit in their homes watching the same movie and tweeting their thoughts on it. And it's an absolutely fabulous way that they can use technology to allow people around the world to connect and to feedback on a movie. So that's a fun element of it all. So I think those are important things to think about. So next steps. What I'd like to see is that people begin to think about becoming more inclusive in their approach. They actually acknowledge that there are some challenges in becoming international or becoming more international as an association. And that they actually do start to think, oh, this might be a little bit more difficult. I've got to do a bit more preparation before I become involved in some elements of this. And I think the next point is a unit level rethink. I think we need to think better about how we use webinars and to factor in time zones. It's not going to be perfect for everybody, but we need to think about working to vary the timings, etc. To think about what's included in conference and how it's packaged. So, we all want more international speakers, but that means we need to think more logically about how we organise conference so that we give enough lead time for people to be able to get visas, to be able to make their cases to come across, etc. For divisions, it's how do they build on work that groups like legal, etc., have done on building alliances with other professional associations. So it's thinking creatively about how we can work with others to partner to help deal with some of the challenges. It's using technology for collaboration. So as I was saying, it's using webinars. It's trying to break down some of the barriers. It's potentially using Twitter to allow more people to interact. It's providing a number of different channels. We need to communicate, and in communicating, we need to seek that feedback. We need to understand what does work and what doesn't work, and allow people different channels in which they can make that feedback. And we need to communicate what we're doing and communicate it over and over again, but also seeking the feedback, and if we tweak things, acknowledging how we do it. So, we're well on the road. It's just we need to constantly remember that different things will have challenges, and that we've got to be as inclusive as possible. And that's it from me.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining us and getting up at the crack of dawn at your side, especially in this late winter time where it's so dark out. By the time we get up, even normal time when I work. So let's give Kate a round of applause. Thanks a lot, Kate.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers.
Okay.